Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Join us here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first. Remember the Ouija board? It was just for fun, right? I mean, what truth could you glean from a Ouija board? Well, ask Alicia Garza-Martinez. She says thanks to the Ouija board, several family mysteries were solved, and she turned that experience into a book entitled Women So Divine. Now, this was originally a short story, right?
Yes. I first published the same story in Mexico. It was a short story, which then became the first chapter of my book. It all started with a family reunion. The 7 women of my family on my mother's side got together in Puebla, a state in Mexico, to celebrate my cousin's quinceañera party, which is the Mexican equivalent to the Sweet 16 party in the United States. And the day before the party, we played a Ouija game. And during that game, the voices of 3 family members who died in mysterious circumstances came through. So there was the voice of a 2-year-old little girl, the voice of an uncle, and one of my aunt's husbands, and my grandfather. But what was most chilling or more startling was that one of the voices said, "You killed me." So everything was a lot of confusion, and my mother and my aunts abruptly stopped the session.
Does that mean that somebody killed somebody in that room?
Yes, we asked who killed whom. I mean, who's talking? Who's this speaking? And we didn't get any answers after that. So there was all confusion, and my mother and her sisters abruptly stopped the game. So I wanted to know what had happened. I wanted to know more. And I started asking questions. I asked them what happened with this, what happened with this other one, what happened to the little girl, and all that. And if they were talking at all, they would give me contradictory versions of what had happened. So I knew the answer to the mysteries of what happened to the family, those family members, lay in my mother, her sisters, and my cousins. So I set out to find out what happened, and I tell it in 8 chapters.
How long did it take you to get to the truth?
It took some years. Of course, the novel that I wrote, this Women So Divine, is reality based on fiction. So I took some literary licenses, but I'm not telling what's true and what's fiction. But to get to the bottom of the truth took some years. Yes.
And you found who was responsible?
Yes. And what the Ouija was talking about, who killed who.
Your book could, if it takes off, could increase Ouija sales significantly.
I hope so. Well, I never played the Ouija again. I was so scared, so shocked.
What were some of the other things that you found?
There were family mysteries, like one of my aunts telling me that she didn't think she was the daughter of my grandparents. And I discovered the truth about it. I write about it in the book.
She just had a feeling that they weren't her parents?
Right. She had an experience with a woman telling her, you're not the daughter of that woman. That's not your mother. And your mother died a long time ago.
There's a lot of spirituality going on here.
Yes.
A lot of feeling, a lot of, trusting instincts and intuition.
Yes, a lot of intuition, yes.
Does Netflix know about this? I think this should be a Netflix series.
Well, In Spanish, there's a movie being made. Well, there's already the script being worked on to make a movie, but it's going to be in Spanish.
Is it being made in Mexico?
It's being made in Mexico, yes.
So are you involved with that?
Yes, I'm involved with that, yes.
So I guess people know about this book.
I published the book in 21 in Mexico. So I did a lot of book signing, a lot of book presentations, and it sold a lot. I did a lot of interviews in Spanish in Mexico.
Are there lessons to be learned?
Well, it's important to find out about your past because it's a liberating experience. It's a healing experience. And if you write about it, which, you write about what you know, and we all know what experiences we've had in our families. So writing about what happened in your families, about the family's mysteries and secrets, it's not only liberating, but it's also healing.
Does your family still talk to you? Like, did anybody stop talking to you?
Well, there was one, the son of a cousin who broke up relationships with me. Yes.
Does that bother you?
Not really. I tell the truth.
The truth hurts.
I guess. Yeah.
Another thing this book illustrates is that when you have a feeling about something, sometimes it's true.
Yes. Yes. And facing the truth can set you free.
The trick is distinguishing between imagination and real truth. That's where we get in trouble. That's where people get confused.
That's true. But when you're writing, you take literary licenses. So it's okay. And I changed names and everything so that there wouldn't be too much trouble with my family. And they're okay with it.
Is there a sequel to this book?
No, there's no sequel.
You're not going to keep writing?
I keep writing, but about other topics.
What was your purpose in wanting to do this interview?
Well, I wanted to let people know there's something I like them to know. When I wrote the short story that became the first chapter of my book, when I first wrote it, I called it La Niña. It was a short story called La Niña. And I submitted it to a contest in a newspaper the newspaper was sponsoring this contest, and it won first prize. It's a newspaper with the largest circulation in the north of Mexico. So a lot of people who read the story, they published the story. So a lot of people who read it wrote to me asking me what had happened to this little girl, what happened to my grandfather, what happened to my uncle. And then I knew I was inspired to write the novel, but it wasn't until the pandemic, much later, when I had time in my hands, and to paraphrase Virginia Woolf, when I had a room of my own to work on, that I started writing the book. It was very successful in Mexico, so I hope it's just as successful in the United States.
Well, I hope so too, Alicia. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Barrie Crawford is a second grade teacher in North Carolina who, with the help of some family members, finally published All Things Equal to send a clear message to bullies.
I had the book written for a while, but my sons gave me the courage because they both are in acting. And I noticed that I've always been afraid of rejection, and it's held me back for a long, long time. But I noticed that they would go out for parts and not always get it, and it didn't matter to them. It didn't stop them from going for the next part. And that's what gave me the courage to say, you know what, it's always going to be a no if I don't try.
That's right. That is
Yeah.
true.
And that actually is what made me say, just try it. And if it doesn't work, at least I'll never have that thought in the back of my mind that if I'd only tried.
Right.
And one day they had, this was several years ago, they had a bunch of friends over at the house. They were in the living room playing video games. And I was in my bedroom getting dressed. It was probably 10 boys in the living room. And every time something great happened on the game, they all cheered. Whenever something bad happened, they all, sighed or were disappointed. And they all laughed at the same time. And I thought it was funny because I could just hear one voice. And when I looked into the living room, it was like the rainbow color. There were boys that were black and white and Hispanic and Asian, and they have a Somalian friend. And it just made me so happy to see all of these different boys that look different, but they're all the same. And that's what made me think of the book, All Things Equal, because I said we may not look the same, but inside we all love the same way, we all hate the same way, we all fear, we all, everything's the same. Just the outside is different. And that's how I thought of the book.
Nice. Now, you put a story together. Do you have main characters?
Yes, Serena, she is named after my grandmother,
Okay.
and Tommy.
All right. And how old are they?
They're celebrating the end of school and the beginning of summer vacation. So they are going to the zoo with their families, and they stop by at the park first before they go to the zoo. And that's when they are introduced to this butterfly. And the butterfly just teaches them a life lesson because they tend to treat people who don't look like they do differently in a negative way.
What do they look like?
Tommy and Serena are they are Caucasian, and Serena knows that what Tommy, how he acts, she knows it's not right, but she never corrects him.
Well, what's he do?
When they're at the zoo, Tommy sees a little girl who is overweight, and they happen to be feeding the elephants. And so Tommy asked the little girl if she wants peanuts too, because she's like the size of an elephant. And Serena sees him do that. She witnesses it and she knows it's wrong, but she kind of giggles and goes along with it. And the little girl runs away crying because she is so embarrassed.
Oh.
Yeah. And then they go to the monkey exhibit, and there's a little boy in a wheelchair. And the little boy in the wheelchair has cotton candy. And Tommy snatches the cotton candy from him and says, "Get up and run and snatch it from me, and you can have it." And of course, the little boy can't, and his wheelchair turns over. And again, Serena doesn't say anything, and Tommy just laughs. And she gives the cotton candy back to the boy, and Tommy says she's a party pooper. From there, they go to the reptile exhibit, and there's a little black girl there who has very dark skin and very curly, kinky hair. And Tommy says to her that he could never be friends with her because she doesn't look the way that he does. And of course, the little girl just cries. So at this point, once they leave the zoo, they go to the park for the picnic. And um, Serena sits down with this lemonade, cold lemonade, and this butterfly lands on her shoulder. And when it lands on her shoulder, it's amazing. It's like the prettiest thing she had ever witnessed. And she said that it seems to look her directly in the eye. And the butterfly flutters away. And because she wants to see it some more, she follows it. She runs after it. And she doesn't realize that the Tommy is right behind her. So the butterfly goes into this gate, this golden gate. And because she wants to see it, she follows it. And once they go into this magical garden, that's when things start to happen. They are amazed because they see winter, spring, summer, and fall like right next to each other. And they are like, how in the world can this happen? How can winter be right next to spring, and spring right next to summer, and summer right next to fall? And in winter, they see a big snowman, bare trees. Right next to that, they see flowers blooming and baby birds and mommy birds because it's spring. And then they see right next to that, they see the beach with fish jumping in and out of the water, seashells on the ocean, on the beach. And then right next to that, of course, they see fall. And the trees are bare, the leaves are falling, they jump into this pile, and they're just amazed because they're in this magical garden. So, wanting to see more and to explore, they see this pond. And when they look into the pond, they jerk their heads back really quick because, like, I can't believe what I just saw. They look back and their faces are big and round and their tummies are big. And when they look at each other, Tommy is overweight, just like that little girl at the elephant exhibit. And when Serena looks at him and starts laughing, his feelings are hurt because he said, that's not nice for you to laugh at me because I'm overweight. Um, then they kind of go on, and as they're running, Tommy falls, and there's this like fog. And when Serena realizes Tommy's in a wheelchair, and so she's like, Tommy, don't worry about it. We're in a magical garden. Things are going to be okay. And he's like, but I want to run and I want to jump and I want to play, and my body won't let me do it. And why? Because I'm still Tommy, but I'm in a body that's not working with me. And she said, don't worry, we're in a magical garden. Everything's going to be okay. So they go on and she's pushing him. And as she's pushing him, the wheelchair disappears and Tommy's dancing and he's jumping and he's happy. Then they see this huge cloud come approaching them, and the cloud is full of sparkles and stars, and it smells like cinnamon and vanilla cookies, and they're holding hands. And when the cloud dissipates, Serena is staring at Tommy, and he's like, why are you looking at me? And he looks down and he realizes that his legs are brown and his arms are brown and all of his skin is brown, and he reaches up to his hair and his hair is curly, um, and he starts to cry, but then his crying turns to laughter because he realizes what this whole adventure was about, um, and it was to show them that you're still Tommy even if you're overweight. You're still Tommy even if you're in a wheelchair. You're still Tommy even if your skin is brown. Um, and at that point, they appreciate the experiment and they never judge people by the way they look or act any longer. And so at the end, Serena says, now I know why that butterfly landed on my shoulder. And it was to teach me a lesson, that we're all equal, regardless of how we look or how we act. Um, and so that's what the story is about.
I just love it. Is such a great adventure. So colorful and creative. It's a beautiful story. It really
Thank
is.
you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, you're already teaching a school. What a great book to read to your students.
Yeah, they loved it. They really, really did love it because a lot of kids, even now, are bullied, and I witness it and it breaks my heart.
Yeah. Your school is letting you do some book readings and signings in the school.
Yes, yes, they are.
You are so lucky. Are you going to keep
Yeah,
writing?
I am. I'm halfway through with my second book, which is called Have You Ever? Um, and I'm going to work on that, try to finish that during the summertime.
Great. Well, you keep it
Yeah.
up, man, because you're sending a great message.
Thank you.
Kendra Couch is finishing up college in Alaska where she was raised and says she's got several books in the works, but the first one she decided to publish is entitled A View from Avalon, inspired by a video game.
It was actually a Minecraft world that my brother and I built. We just built this little town, and we created this cool little fort that also had a maze in it. And my brother was like, man, this would make a really good story. And so I just started writing a story, and 4 years into it, I edited it a few times, changed a couple details. And then I was like, you know what? This story actually is pretty cool. Maybe I should send it out to get published. And I sent it out. So
tell me about this world you created.
we built the entire city and civilization that the story revolved around. And then I was just like, man, I guess we need to come up with a story for this. And so I just started creating characters and the society that revolved around the city we built, and went from there.
Who are these people?
The main character, the protagonist, is a kid named Max Hopper. He is kind of like your conflicted hero. He doesn't know if he wants to be the good guy, if he wants to be the bad guy. He's trying to decide really where he stands. And his primary opponent is the mayor, Kellen Weathers, who's honestly kind of just a messed up dude. He's got problems, and he's trying to figure out exactly how he wants to continue to control, or if he wants to continue to control. And so both the hero and the antagonist are kind of conflicted, and I like to try and see how many interesting tidbits I can get in there to get you thinking, wait, is this really the good guy, is this the bad guy? I like to throw people for a loop, so I kind of went for bold, if you will.
Well, give me an example of what you're talking about.
There's one particular chapter in the book that has the antagonist Kellen and the protagonist Max sitting kind of over a breakfast, and they're talking about how each of them are both rats. They're both bad people, both trying to do something, and they don't know if it's good or bad. So it's kind of a conflict of interest. Kind of they discuss the different aspects of how they're both good and bad people and why they've done what they've done.
What have they done?
Let's see. So the antagonist is kind of, how shall I say, instilled population control measures that he thinks are adequate and good for the town, whereas Max has gone against everything he's set in place, and he's done some kind of bad things about it and gone about it in probably the wrong ways to try and stop Kellen from continuing his elimination of the population, if you will. So they've both done very bad things in the name of what they think is right.
What's the point of eliminating a population?
Maintaining strict numbers so it doesn't overpopulate and create a deficit of any resource.
That sounds really dystopian.
Yes.
Any love interests here?
Yeah, I have one started, and since I'm trying to make this book like one of a three book series, I have one at least kind of where it's like, this could play out this way, and so I'm kind of waiting until the second book to see if it really takes off.
Well, if they have a love interest, they might want to make more of their own, but they don't want others to have the ability to do the same.
Also true.
You are very creative. I mean, this sounds terrible, but do you ever get bored in Alaska? I mean, does Alaska pave the way for a lot of creativity when it's so freaking cold you can't even move and there's nothing else to do?
It can get kind of difficult to find inspiration. So sometimes if it just kind of gets like that, I'll just go outside into like one of my favorite little scenic areas, and I'll just kind of sit there, and it just gets so quiet out there where there's nobody around that you kind of just, all you can do is think. And so a lot of ideas will come to you then. So
do the people in your town know that you're a writer?
No, not really. I kind of live up to the whole writer is a hermit type thing. I don't get out very much, and if I do, I'm mainly by myself or with a very small group of people.
So how are you telling people about the book? Have you started anything online?
Yeah, I've sent out a few things online, and those people that I do know, they're a lot more extroverted than I am, so they're very good at promoting it. My fiance will drag me along and be like, all right, we're going to go talk to these people, and he'll make me talk to everybody. So
what does writing do for you?
It's just, I enjoy it. It's a creative outlet. I enjoy creating the stories, and since I'm not particularly great at talking to people, or at least going out of my way to talk to people, I like to observe people in conversation. A lot of what I do is just people watching when I go anywhere. And so a lot of the interesting things I see when I'm people watching, I'll just be like, man, I could write a story about that. And so I like to throw in real life conversations every now and then to the books. And writing is I've just enjoyed doing it since I was really, really young. And I like creating the characters.
So you will overhear a conversation and that might wind up in one of your books.
Yes, it's kind of a character study into what humans can do, good or bad.
What are you getting a degree in there?
Political science. Kind of hoping to go into political journalism because that would incorporate my love of writing and research and then add that into what I got my degree in. So
What do you find interesting about politics?
how all the different groups and how all the different interests play into each other. So how one group can play into this and then that group plays into that and then they all are interconnected somehow. And that is just really interesting. I like to see how, I guess the spider web of it is the most interesting part.
And would that be something you would incorporate into your stories?
Yeah, I was told this by my brother, who's been my main source of writing critique, is he's like, man, you really get into the technical, the politics on this, don't you?
So there is politics in your book.
Yes, a little bit. It's nothing overt as in comparing to modern society politics. It's just the intricacy of the political web that is in the story itself.
Give me an example of that.
So the primary antagonist, he has a political party known as the Apostolic Federation. And I make vague mention of it in this book, but I'm really going to play into it in the second book, where he's trying to create a society fully enhanced by his political motivations and no one else. He's kind of creating a totalitarian rule, if you will. And I kind of incorporate the elements of how most totalitarian dictators have risen to power in the first book to kind of create the backdrop of what I'm looking for in the next two. So,
is that something you see in our current political climate?
I mean, everybody tries it. So, I mean, yes and no. And everybody tries to get more power once they have their hands on it. So you could see aspects of it, but nothing has come to fruition as of now, at least not in the United States.
It sounds like you're on a very interesting trail here.
Thank you. I try.
Well, thanks for making room for me in your schedule today.
Oh, of course. Thank you for calling.
Grace Boykin has written 5 books. A Turbulent Life is her first for Page, a former history and mass media teacher. She started writing in the 90s after she divorced and decided she needed to look into her past to understand who she really was. And man, what a past you have.
In order for me to find myself, I felt like I had to ask many questions to actually be able to know myself. It tells a story of grandparents from the 1800s to today. It tells of the family. My grandfather, Frank W. Boykin, had quite a history, and he had over 20 businesses in his lifetime. And his motto was, everything's made for love.
And he was a congressman, right, from Mobile, Alabama?
That's correct.
And on your mother's side, you talk about her connection to judges.
They were on the Supreme Court of Missouri.
Your family history is amazing.
It really is. It really is. I felt like I had to start back with the history of my parents, my grandparents, to get to today of how I evolved and how my family evolved. And that's how I have actually come to know myself now. And it tells of their history in a bit and what their accomplishments were. And then it goes into how this was the hardest book I have ever written because it actually starts telling of my history and what had happened to me over the years. Abduction.
So you weave in your story, the story of your grandparents.
That's correct. It also is about training of my mind with the questions that I asked in the first chapter of the book. It starts with many questions to the reader.
What kind of questions?
Like, is money the root of why one would change a person's life? And to me, money is the root of all evil. And because I was abducted, I feel like it was about money. And then I've had people take advantage of me. And what makes a person want to take advantage of someone?
So we learn everything there is to learn about both sides of your family before you delve into what's going on with you?
I do. I do. There was a book about my grandfather that was written years ago called Everything's Made for Love, which is his motto. And I have read that thoroughly, and that's how I learned of my grandfather. And then with my mother's side, I learned from her stories and what she had told me.
What stories stand out for you?
Well, this is an interesting story about my grandfather, Frank Boykin. He was a shop owner back in the 1800s, and this black man came into his shop and he says, "Let me see that newfangled gun up there." And Frank says, "Okay, yeah." So he shows it to him. He says, "How much is that gun?" He says, $40. "I ain't got no $40. And then he says, "What do you have to trade?" And he says, "I got 80 acres of no good land." He said, "Okay, let's go look at it." So they go and look at it, and it has a railroad tracks. It has timber. It has everything my grandfather believed in. And so they go back to the shop. He hands the guy the newfangled gun, and he gets a deed back for 80 acres. And on that 80 acres today are salt domes that store oil and gas. So it's been a very lucrative 80 acres.
Is it still in your family?
It is. Yeah, there are 5 salt domes currently on it. My grandfather was very rich in history. Fascinating story, fascinating, jolly old man. And he worked for the railroad for many years before becoming a U.S. congressman for 28 years.
And during that time, he set the English Channel on fire during World War II?
Well, what happened was he and his wife were reading the newspaper up in Washington, D.C., and they read about the burning of the Tombigbee River in Alabama by Indians. So my grandfather decided to call an oil man in Houston, Texas, and he said, "Can we burn the English Channel? Can you burn it?" And the oil man gave him all the instructions in a telegram. And then my grandfather went to the ambassador of the United States and he says, "We got to get you to Winston Churchill." So they sent the telegram to Winston Churchill, and it was all laid out how to burn the English Channel. He was amazing. He really was. He was a water boy with the railroad at age 8. His mother was deaf, and so he had to be the moneymaker. He was the active one and was the moneymaker for the family. And he, like I said, had 20 jobs over his lifetime. Whitewashing fences. He would go and, this is a good story. A doctor, he was 8 years old, and he had a blue tick hound. And he loved this dog. So he goes into the doctor's office, and he says, "This is the best rabbit dog you'll ever see." And the doctor says, "Okay, well, I'll give you 10 cents for every rabbit that dog can go and kill." So Frank sets off. He goes and he gets 40 rabbits, comes back to the doctor, and the doctor handed him $1 and he thought he was rich, and he ran home and told his mom and gave it to him. He was just really excited about it. But he was a great hunter. There's actually a lodge in McIntosh, Alabama, where we still have in the family today, and it's a 1905 antebellum home. And it houses about 50 people. It's grown throughout the years as the family grows, but it's a hunting preserve.
Okay, so you pose these questions about your life at the beginning of the book. You tell the story of your family, and then by the end of the book, are your questions answered?
No, but I do realize who I am. So I guess in a way they're answered, but not specifically. But I realize the truth. I realize that I have a legacy, and it's left to the future generations. And then we have a family-owned corporation that has continued today, and it generates an income to each of our families. And we've been very, very fortunate in now that it's going on for the fourth generation.
That's amazing.
Very, very.
You know, the name of your book is A Turbulent Life with 3 question marks.
Right.
Why is that?
Because I wanted to leave it to the reader to decide if it's a turbulent life or not. And that's why I had the 3 question marks. I wanted to help other people to understand themselves and the life and the tribulations that they go through, to realize who they really are. And sometimes you have to go back in history to realize who you are.
All righty, Grace. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.